One day there was a guy who managed to steal the Mona Lisa all by himself and make fools of the greatest investigators in the world, even though he had no criminal record. Tell you how he stole it, and especially the crazy story of how he. That if you like this format, my videos are also available as a podcast Spotify, Apple Podcast, Deezer. The links are in the description. To rate us 5 stars, it helps us get discovered on this format. We are on August 21st, little after 7 a.m. and the dew sparkles in the sun on the lawn of Tuileries Garden when Vincenzo enters the Salon Care, one of the most iconic rooms of the Louvre Museum, which houses the works of the greatest masters of the Italian Renaissance. On a Monday, the museum's closing day, and as his contract at the Gobier Glassworks, a long-time partner of the museum, is ending. Soon, Vincenzo wants to take advantage of his last moments of privileged access to the Louvre to walk through the museum. It's empty except for a few guards and workers who don't seem to leave the premises any more than the statues on the ground floor. Room where Vincenzo stands, the one that houses the museum's famous works, no one comes to disturb the calm. The neighboring room tours, deserted as well. When he returns to the initial in front of a painting less than 80 centimeters tall. Woman in the portrait facing him seems not to take her eyes off him. Her sly smile gives him all the encouragement he needs. Quick and delicate movement. Vincenzo unhooks the painting, places it under heads into the stairwell, reserved for employees. He takes tools from floor down pockets of his work jacket and meticulously removes the protective as well as the frame from the painting to hide it under his large coat more easily. Then he continues his descent door, but when turning the handle he panics. The door is locked. He then takes tools out he had put away and tries them all on the lock. One by one, and in his haste he accidentally dismantles the handle. Metal parts fall and crash against the stone floor in a din that echoes for at least several floors. The man Vincenzo hurries to pick up all the pieces, and as he gets up he hears footsteps coming down the stairs in his handle into his pocket and puts on nonchalant air. Level and asks him what he's doing. He doesn't really have any other choice. Tell him the truth, at least part of it. I don't have the keys and the door is locked. He adds to the he doesn't know what. The employee takes out his set of keys, unlocks them, goes out and lets him out as he passes. A young Italian immigrant in small glass worker barely 28 years old steals the Mona Lisa from the Louvre Museum Monday morning in August 1911. See that the rest of the story is even more delirious. To avoid having your digital assets, listen to the message from Deblik. Sponsors this video. Deblik, thanks for sponsoring this video. Deblik is a banking application similar to neobanks you're used to. A free current account and offers instant bank transfers, but Deblik is much more than that. Only account in the world that integrates both your euros and your crypto in the same place. However, the owner of your crypto Deblik wallet is entirely managed by you through your phone. Only you have access to the recovery code to withdraw your funds. Disappears, your funds remain Deblik available. Deblik is regulated in France and is a partner. If you already have discovered with my link in the description, we continue our story. Gioconda or La Gioconda Lisa, or even which Mona simply means Lady Lisa in Italian, and not her first name, is a Renaissance painting by Leonardo da Vinci that would have been created between 1515 approximately. Of Lisa Gerardini, wife of Francesco Condo, a Florentine nobleman. Painting measures 77 by 53 centimeters, to what one might think. It's actually relatively small. It's a practical size if someone decided to steal it by slipping it under their coat. For example, bought by King Francis I. The painting was popularity largely thanks to Giorgio Vasari, a painter contemporary to Da Vinci, particularly renowned for his biographical work on the greatest painters of the Renaissance, a book foundational in art history. Guy was apparently a fan and wrote dozens of pages of praise about it. And in this work of Leonardo, there's a smile so pleasing that it appeared more divine than human, reputed to be so enchanting in that which was absolutely living. Painting also owes much to the authors of the Romantic era who fell in love with it in turn and magnificent praises to it. People in the world at that time most never seen the painting. There was no photography for obvious reasons of non-existence of photography until very shortly before the beginning of our story. There existed few reproductions. Discovered the Mona Lisa everyone through the passionate descriptions made of it, and a myth was created around. This smile so much imagined and so little observed. Among these authors, we can cite. He writes, for example, in Amateur's Guide to the Louvre Museum in 1982, would one not say that the Mona Lisa smiles with a cryptic religion that believing itself alone half opens the folds of its veil. Imprudent one who would surprise it mad and die. Never has taken on a more ineluctably seductive form. Words of last century's author Mulro, the mortal with divine gaze. Triumph of goddess without gaze. Today, the portrait of Mona Lisa the most famous and most reproduced painting in the world. So famous that we tend to use it to represent classical art itself. Book about like classical art. Quite common to put this painting on the cover to represent the subject. But consequently, it's also the target when artists seek to question it. Famous Mona Lisa with a mustache by Salvador Dali, or even LHOQ, by Marcel Duchamp when last century's artists questioned the place of art in a post-World War world. In recent years, but it's undoubtedly Dan Brown's book than the film. Adaptation by Ron Howard of the Da Vinci Code is the most iconic pop culture work to feature the famous painting. Although the story could also have been a film, you'll see. Visitors per day, nearly 20,000. It's also the most visited artwork in the world after the Great Pyramid. To our story. Let's return. In the summer of 1924 hours later, the noticed by the museum. Uncommon for artworks to be photographed or for frames or glass to be readjusted. Pass by a hole in the guard where the Mona Lisa should be hanging, they don't worry more than that. But painter Louis reproduction remained that day to paint an entire wall of paintings in the salon. The absence of the Mona Lisa start working and will therefore alert the guards who stand at the entrance of each room at all hours. The museum is open. The painting is with the photographer should soon return to its place. But when after more than an hour, nothing seems to change, Louis gets impatient and goes to ask other employees what's happening. Finally decides to go check. Only when the museum's photography responds that they don't have the Mona Lisa management is alerted. They check all the services that might be susceptible to temporarily, which is quite a few because the Louvre is quite enormous, and they interrogate the guards. 2 hours after the painter's first inquiry, they have to face the evidence. The Mona Lisa has been stolen. The museum team finally decides to pick up the phone and contact the police. The investigation begins immediately, and Alphonse quickly put on the case. Criminologist is an eminent pioneer investigation techniques, international legend. Real-life Sherlock Holmes. He's a bit like is actually cited in The Baskervilles, a novel by Arthur Conan Doyle. A client of Sherlock Holmes designates him as the greatest expert in all while hearing that Sherlock II is a precursor of biometrics and the use of fingerprints to create a comparison file, the first in France and one of the first world. Anthropometry, he's also the creator of that. Consists of taking measurements of height, weight, but also arm length, leg length, circumference of the torso, etc. to identify culprits with more certainty. He's invented the mugshot as we know it today, with a profile and a front-facing one on which detainee holds a sign with information related to their arrest. During an arrest, all these elements are then gathered in the same file. This system is called them and will be instantly adopted across the channel as well as in the United States and is still the most used system in the world. Alphonse is also the inventor of technique for preserving shoe prints and bullet impressions using sorts of molds, but also the use of dynamometry to measure the degree of force used during a robbery, notably. Genius, in short, a true scientist. Alphonse is order and logical thinking. Cases have escaped him during his career. This earned him during his lifetime. Sherlock Holmes, in addition to by Hercule Poirot in a novel by Agatha Christie and in one of the Lupin stories by Maurice Leblanc, his status as a posthumous legend. He also misanalyzed the writings in the Dreyfus affair at the beginning 1900s, thus wrongly incriminating him. At the time, he was accused of anti-Semitism from the government to obtain conclusions going in that direction in 1900, so it's still quite possible that his conclusion came from xenophobia or then simply just handwriting analysis. That wasn't his thing. The very beginning of graphology methods, the art of handwritten scripts, so it's also possible to just paint in any superlatorate of the guy without mentioning this point. Very significant. So I'll leave this information. Louvre, Alphonse Bertillon, accompanied by no less than 60 police inspectors sent by fact. Artwork should have been where he reflects the museum director about several things. The last time the Mona Lisa was seen, access to the salon care on the museum's closing day, a number of employees possessing keys to entrances and exits. The frame and glass of the also shown, found under a staircase reserved for employees. With a brush over the entire glass, Alphonse manages to find thumbprint in good condition, sends for comparison with police file. Meticulous comparison that's manually, and without other clues, very long to get a result. Lacking more clues in this theft story, all means deployed. Alphonse knows 24 hours after a crime, crucial, and he silently examines possible hypotheses while pacing in the room, occasionally asks questions to other officers or museum director whose face drained of color because he knows perfectly well that facing the magnitude scandal, he will inevitably have submit his resignation. Idea. Suddenly, Alphonse has one of the officers that was located next to the Mona Lisa. The officer pulls the painting, lifts it, but can't manage it. Then asks the criminologist to unhook the frame, and he succeeds on the first try. Hooks that hold the artworks to the museum wall and Alphonse has a good intuition in supposing that the person who stole the Mona Lisa knew perfectly how it worked, because it doesn't seem that force was used to unhook the frame, which remained imperfect. Similarly, the frame and retrieve the painting, indicating culprit that the very certainly knew what they were doing. That Alphonse Bertillon therefore 275 people working in museum. Discoveries following his complete inventory of the collections owned by that museum is ordered, and the result is no less than 300 missing pieces. Its enormous attention turns to none other than the author who made poems in the shape of drawings, and then they forced us to do the same. And it made really lame stuff. Him. Yes, he gets sent to jail for his alibis and search his home because he becomes almost directly the main suspect in this case. Ask me what he's doing in this story and why it's so obvious to suspect him. Fall on makes the suspicions that his friend and former assistant Jerry stole from the Louvre so regularly that for him it really a self-service mess, and moreover he didn't particularly hide it. Guillaume took advantage of Jerry's stealing talents when he, for example, offered a statuette from set of 3 primitive statues, claimed to have done the job himself to brag to his friends like somewhat primitive statuettes. So things that Jerry stole were thousands of artworks everywhere, and that these statuettes weren't as respectable as classical works by Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci. They didn't notice. But Guillaume ended up getting caught. A few years earlier, disappearance of the Mona Lisa. When the uniform show up quickly, men offered him a free stay via the prison route, convinced that he was the one who interrogating our imprisoned poet. Investigators begin to doubt it wasn't him who did the job. What if, looking a bit into his entourage, it's another famous artist? Then attracts suspicion. It turns out there's another guy who found it super funny retrieve artworks from the Louvre, brag about having stolen them, who had gotten them via Jerry by buying them from him. No, that's before going to his place to ask him a few questions. That's how they found the second statue from the set, belonging to none other than Pablo Picasso's, who actually used it as a model to paint his famous Demoiselle d'Avignon. Police investigation led because our friend Jerry had a lot of humor. Cold feet had very little. Thought it would mega funny to send the third statuette to the daily newspaper Parisian, claiming to be the author Mona Lisa theft. Knew how to have fun back really then. Prove his guilt a bit more. Suggested going to check if there wasn't another statuette at good old Pablo's if they didn't believe this guy is funny. He's at the end of the day like that, he's a joker. Find stolen stuff everywhere, but still no Mona Lisa, and the false leads multiply. Therefore decides to broaden the scope of research and asks the Louvre for a list of all people and companies having had access areas to reserved for Louvre personnel this to take their fingerprints and compare them to those found on the painting's glass. Time to get moving because with false leads, the case has been going on and newspapers around are making headlines about the scandal. Theories and offer their own up to 50,000 francs, 180,000 euros today, for anyone back who would. The Mona Lisa. Excitement, all reproductions of Mona Lisa are published in newspapers internationally, and the artwork for the first time by the entire world, which only knew it and by through name. Its many descriptions. It's therefore at this time that becomes the most popular painting in accordance with Alphonse's company in charge of glazing the paintings, mandated by the Louvre Museum to protect about 1,600 artworks between 1909 and 1911. Following acts of vandalism, workers worked on this large-scale project, including Vincenzo. Therefore, all invited to go to the police station so their fingerprints can be taken as soon as, which they all hasten to do. All, maybe not, because one stubborn worker named Vincenzo himself won't show up to the summons, and the suspicious inspectors will then pay him a little visit. Maid's room very summarily furnished that the police interrogate Vincenzo for nearly an hour. Is so small that Vincenzo can't even offer chairs to everyone and sits himself on his bed during the interrogation. Inspectors learn that Vincenzo Peruggia is of Italian origin, that was born in 1881 and that he has lived since 1908, where he came to find work. After working as a painter in Milan since the age of 12. Context, to put this in, xenophobia toward Italians is very strong in France, and Vincenzo unfortunately hasn't escaped it since his, so much so that he's back to live in Italy now that his contract at the Gobier company is. The police tour in the furniture, the corners, but don't linger too much. For them, an Italian immigrant without real experience in the art field, didn't study and who doesn't possess any fortune, doesn't seem to be in a position to orchestrate such impressive theft. Craftsman whose qualities are recognized by his employer actually entrusted him with polishing the protective glass for all the paintings in the salon care. Police are rather looking for a group of people with substantial financial means and well-informed about the field. It seems essential to have to succeed in such an impeccable heist without getting caught. That's how the Vincenzo's home after spending an hour just a few meters from the Mona Lisa, all this time in the false bottom of the suitcase stored under his bed. It's crazy because it was hidden super close to them all this time, just like the subscribe button, which is just below this video, published twice a month. Impressive stories, and if you like it, I encourage you to subscribe by clicking on it right it's there just below. More seriously, searching the police have found certain suspicious elements. Victim of satanism, a lead poisoning disease common at the time among people who work with paint, due to the fact that lead paints were quite common. Vincenzo spent several months in the hospital arriving in France. Explained upon his release racism and combined with his still fragile state due to this disease physical that weakening and can also cause behavioral and other mental symptoms and social problems, particularly when lead exposure begins while the brain is developing. As with young Vincenzo, his psychological deteriorates severely. A few studies that link satanism to delinquency, criminality, because the disease someone extremely irritable, violent. Chances of developing schizophrenia if exposed in utero. But we don't know what Vincenzo's mother was doing during her pregnancy. It's difficult to establish a link. No diagnosis was made on this subject. What's interesting is that it goes to a point where today some establish a link between periods of history that were particularly violent in satanism, when lead was suddenly heavily used in weaponry and industry. People became aggressive, and so there was more chance of large-scale conflict. When we talk about satanism, also the disease that would have Van Gogh's mental disorders. Let's get back to Vincenzo. But he sinks into after his hospital stay. Given how they made kids drink half wine at school back then, I can't imagine what you had to down to be labeled an alcoholic. Develop intense paranoia. He will also is probably another consequence of heavy lead exposure. This paranoia mixed with his unfortunate experiences surely created in Vincenzo a resentment strong enough to take action. We'll see later. Because, surprisingly, his motive wasn't just told you all that I just hadn't spotted at the time. The investigation stagnates. New information or the newspapers twists to publish concerning the case end up relegating the news to small pages before completely abandoning the subject. Other news steals the spotlight, like randomly the sinking Titanic in 1912. Later that Vincenzo finally decides to return to Italy, and in 1913 contacts Alfredo Geri, an owner of several art galleries in Florence, to quietly propose buying back the Mona Lisa. Intrigued by the proposition and to go meet him, but he doesn't go alone. Friend has himself accompanied by to be the director of the Uffizi Gallery, a former Florentine palace housing one of the main Italian museums, particularly Italian Renaissance works, therefore particularly well placed to authenticate the painting on the spot. The two men are astonished to find that the painting seems to actually be authentic, indeed corresponds to a painting from the 16th century, marks of a painting that was exposed at the Louvre. In short, everything matches. They are very surprised by this discovery. Clearly Vincenzo is not a pro. Arranges to meet his potential buyers in a random hotel in the city. The painting out of his suitcase. That doesn't look like much, without caution than that. Asked to borrow the painting to perform more thorough verifications, which Vincenzo, accepts. Clearly naive, actually, what's happening in his head at this, imagines he's returning the painting to Italy, and that when this becomes known, erected as a hero, and offered a substantial reward. Additional verifications, Giovanni are categorical. The original painting by Leonardo da Vinci. Faced with this discovery, he immediately apprehends Vincenzo without great difficulty, going to the same hotel room as during the meeting given to Alfredo trial. His lawyers will plead patriotism. That they Vincenzo was a victim of xenophobia from the French during his stay in Paris, and that he seeing so many works by Italian masters exhibited in the museum of a country that treated him so. They also rely on the argument that objective objective of returning his painting to Italy refers to Napoleon's raids at the very end of the 18th and very beginning of the 19th, when many Italian works were indeed stolen, and some are indeed in the Louvre Museum. Except the case with the Mona Lisa, normally by Francis I as early as the 16th, as we said earlier, and which has therefore been officially owned by then the Empire, then the Republic since 1518. Vincenzo's motive whatever seems the case, to satisfy public opinion, from which he obtains massive support. Judges show for these reasons him, and he is only sentenced to prison and will ultimately serve only 7. As for the painting, it goes on a tour through Italy before being returned to the Louvre Museum in 1914, and for a short time only, because with World War I approaching, most of the museum's works were sent successively to the regions of Bordeaux and Toulouse to ensure their protection. Mona Lisa's portrait is once again exhibited at the Louvre until World War II, when it finds itself hidden again, this time in small towns and villages, notably in the Quercy, like Ciampigny. World War I, Vincenzo serves in his country's army. Of the war, he gets married and returns in Paris, where he opens a shop where he will finish his life. 1925, he dies only 44 years old. Videos about incredible museum. We made a video about the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist, which is also